After concluding our Mapping European Populism panel series, ECPS is moving beyond the borders of Europe and expanding its project to include cases of populism around the world by organising a new panel series to map global populism. To this end, it brings scholars together every month or on a regular basis to discuss the state of political populism in different regions of the world. The aim is to gather a complete picture of populism around the globe with regular sessions throughout the year. Following each session, ECPS publishes a panel report with the video recording which can be found on its website. This is an invaluable source of information, not only for scholars, but also for a wider audience, including policymakers, who are concerned by the current challenges to democracy posed by populist politics around the globe. Today will be the third session of the Mapping Global Populism series, jointly organised by the European Centre for Populism Studies, ECPS, and the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalisation, ADI. And we will today examine religious populism and radicalisation in Indonesia. Let me introduce our panellists for today. I would like to start with our moderator, Professor Ihsan Yilmaz. Ihsan Yilmaz is a research professor of political science and international relations at Deakin University's ADI. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at Oxford University's Regent College and at Brussels-based think tank ECPS. Previously, he worked at the universities of Oxford and London and has a strong track record of leading multi-site international research projects to successful completion. At Deakin, his projects have been funded by the Australian Research Council, the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Victorian Government, and the Gerda Henkel Foundation. He is the author of Authoritarianism, Informal Law and Legal Hybridity, published by Palgrave Macmillan, and Creating the Desired Citizen, and that was published through Cambridge University Press. Our first speaker for this panel is Dr. Inaya Rakhmani, who will talk about the main drivers of populism in Indonesia. Dr. Inaya Rakhmani is the Director of Asia Research Centre, Universitas, Indonesia. Rakhmani uses cultural political economy to study media and communications, as well as knowledge and information in order to explain broader capitalist changes. She is deeply concerned about social sciences, social inequalities, and democratic developments. She has been researching the role of social and mass media in hindering democratic developments in Indonesia with comparisons to India, Egypt, and Turkey from 2015 to today. She recently finalised a study on social sciences and policy responses in Southeast Asia, spanning 11 countries, in partnership with the Global Development Network and the IDRC. She is also an honorary member of the Indonesian Young Academy of Sciences, ALMI. Her work has been published in prominent journals, and she is also the author of Mainstreaming Islam in Indonesia, Television, Identity, and the Middle Class, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2016. Her publication on populism is Authoritarian Populism in Indonesia, the Role of the Political Campaign Industry in Engineering Consent and Coercion. And this was published in the Journal of Current Southeast Asian Affairs. Dr. Pradana Zulian will be our second speaker, and the title of his speech is Radicalism, Extremism, and Civilizationalist Populism in Indonesia. Dr. Pradana Zulian is an Associate Professor in Islamic Studies and the Vice Dean for Academic Affairs at the Faculty of Islamic Studies, University of Muhammadiyah, Malang, in Indonesia. In 2015, he gained his PhD in Sociology of Islamic Law from the Department of Malay Studies from the National University of Singapore, NUS. In addition, he studied politics at the University of Massachusetts, US, in 2017, and Islamic thought and philosophy at Al Mustafa International University in Qom, Iran, in 2020. His current publication is Indonesia, a Complex Religious Diversity Governance, in the multi-author volume Routledge Handbook on the Governance of Religious Diversity 2020 and Radicalization and Resilience Case Study Indonesia, in Project Greece, Religion, Diversity and Radicalization with the European University Institute, EUI, in 2020. Dr. Kurniawati Hastuti Dewi will be our third speaker, presenting on gender and populism with a lecture titled Gender Roles in Indonesia's Religious Populism. Dr. Kurniawati Hastuti Dewi is a senior researcher at the Research Centre for Politics, National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN. Her research interests are in gender and politics, women and politics, gender and Islam, local politics, and civil society. She is also the founder and coordinator of the Gender and Politics Research Team at BRIN since 2015. She received her doctoral degree in Asian Studies from the Graduate School of Asian and African Area Studies, ASAFAS, at Kyoto University in Japan in 2012. Her publications are numerous, including Indonesian Women and Local Politics, Islam, Gender and Networks in Post-Suharto Indonesia, published by the National University of Singapore Press and Kyoto University Press, 2015. Her article, Motherhood Identity in the 2019 Indonesian Presidential Elections, Populism and Political Division in the National Women's Movement, was also published in the Contemporary Southeast Asia Journal. This takes us to our fourth speaker, Dr. Igede Wahyu Wicaksana, who will talk on populism and foreign policy, the Indonesian case. Dr. Igede Wahyu Wicaksana is a senior international relations lecturer in the Department of International Relations in the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Erlangga, Surabaya, Indonesia. His research interests include Indonesian politics, security and foreign policy, ASEAN regionalism, and international relations of great powers in the Indo-Pacific, and non-traditional security challenges in Southeast Asia, focusing on climate change and transnational terrorism. He has published in numerous articles in acclaimed international journals, and his current publication is Populism and Foreign Policy, the Indonesian Case. As a reminder, I would just like to note that we do the Q&A session after the completion of the presentations. You can write your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your virtual hand and pose your questions in person. And on to you, Professor Yilmaz.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending this exciting panel. As you can see, their resumes, their bios are excellent, and I am really very curious what they will say about populism in Indonesia. They will be looking at the issue from different dimensions, which is great. And we'll have the Q&A session after we finish all presentations, so that you have an opportunity to ask questions, not just to one speaker, maybe more than one speaker may want to answer the question, or you may want to ask a question to more than one person. So we'll wait until they finish. The first presenter, as Chloe said, is Dr. Inaya Rakhmani. So over to you, Dr. Inaya.
Thank you, Professor Yilmaz. I just wanted to make sure I have 15 minutes, don't I?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was tasked to speak about the global drivers of populism. So it's fitting that I rethink some of the work that I did in comparing the rise of Islamic populism in Indonesia since roughly 2016 was the largest religiously driven mass demonstration during electoral politics in the capital city of Jakarta, Indonesia. But the rise of Islamic expression has actually been on the increase since the late 90s, and even more so after the 1998 toppling down of the authoritarian government, Suharto, and the ensuing democratization and decentralization period. So many of the literature on the rise of Islamic expression and populism in Indonesian literature, or literature on Indonesia, ask why, during a moment of democratic participation, is identity politics, Islamic expressions, religious extremism, and radicalization on the increase? Should it not be the case that with more open markets, more open democratic spaces, the resulting effect would be a moderation of religious expression? It turns out that is not the case. And many of the scholars working on this have also seen and agree with that fact, even though they come from different strands of paradigms and academic traditions. But this is a case that not only happens in Indonesia, but also in other parts of the world. in the US with Trumpism, and the UK with Brexit, and zooming in on the Asian region and the Middle East, there's Erdogan in Turkey, there is Duterte in the Philippines, and there's Hindutva nationalism with Modi's India. So the question and the problem about why identity politics and populism, right-wing populism, is on the rise in democratic times is a question that all citizens and academics of the world today face, despite their different positionalities, historical traditions, and academic leanings. But the term and the theory of populism is not something that appeared since the 2000s or since these phenomena occurred. The study largely focused on Latin American. We can see De La Torre, Armstrong's, and Western and European context with Norris and Inglehart's work. And the meaning of populism in Latin America is very different compared to the way academics and pundits are concerned about right-wing populism rise in democratic context in the past 10, 15 years. There is a link between a social basis with an elite that uses the narrative that links ordinary people, the people and the corrupt elite, and using this social basis to give party support and bring a more direct connect between the elite and their popular social basis. But in Indonesia and in Asia, populism appears as a way or as a response towards rising inequalities, more and more uprooting on social dislocation as a result of the extensive processes of neoliberalization, in which the state is more and more and less dominant in terms of providing basic services to everyone. So in a time when economic growth is really strong in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia, there's also a highest number of the widest gap of social and wealth inequalities in the country. So what happens when there is high economic growth, but also high inequality? The resulting is there is aggravation, there is unrequited aspirations for upward mobility coming from those working, from the working classes, the lower classes, and also the middle classes. So with this assumption, we understand what happened during the 2016 largest Islamic demonstration against then Christian and Chinese governor Basuki Cahayapurnama as a symptom of this rising frustration against such uneven development and uneven wealth distribution across people living in Jakarta and more largely across Indonesia. And in some of my work, I use Simon Jessup's framework of cultural political economy to understand in which moments and why some discursive narratives such as we don't want an infidel leader or the Chinese elite has been corrupt since the colonial times, why such narratives, such discourses can be mobilized into moments of material conditions in which we can see hundreds and thousands and some testify to be millions of people to congregate in large spaces to express their political opinions against a racialized and usually minority group religion that is perceived to be corrupt elites taking away their resources from them. Since 2014, 15, 16, I've been studying about how come the middle class that is in many of the literature, especially from the US and Western Europe, are seen as the bastion for moderation. But many of factions and sections of the middle class were part and parcel to the demonstration against the Christian Chinese governor in 2016 and 17. Many of the processes of commercialization that occurred in the end of the 1990s and then throughout the 2000s bring in global products from northern countries into Southeast Asia and also the large cities across Indonesia. And these consumerist products help the middle class, the expanding middle class, of the 2000s to survive an increasingly volatile and precarious world. So by legitimizing their purchase, legitimizing their consumers' behaviors to survive everyday neoliberal conditions, the halal label means something to help them know where to go, which products to consume, and whose fatwa to listen to, because it gives a sense of safety, not different from how a coat protects us during winter, a helmet protects us when we're riding a motorcycle. In the halal label, it protects the Muslim habitus, the Islamic habitus, to make sure that as they survive an increasingly globalized, westernized, and secular world, they can still maintain that private bubble in which what they consume, what they eat and put in their bodies are halal or align with religious dogmas and doctrines. The problem at the core of this phenomenon, and especially we studied female participants in the mass demonstration using interviews as well as surveys, is that they graduated from middle and upper tertiary education, and yet the kinds of jobs that they acquire are under the skills that they have obtained in comparison to their education. So in spite of having worked very hard to attain upward mobility, this promise of the modern life, the life with higher security was not fulfilled. And in fact, in reality, it was it stood in contrast to the kind of economic inequality that they see on an everyday level. One of the participants that really struck a chord with me was one of the participants. He was a male participant of the demonstration. He's nearing 50, and he was taking care of his wife, undergoing chemotherapy. And the hospital that he went to was Siloam Hospital in a segregated and gentrified area in Jakarta, usually portrayed as upper class. And it's an area that was developed by Chinese conglomerates. In the hospital, he asked the managers if he can conduct his Friday prayers, and they said there's no mosque in the vicinity, so he would need to go outside to one of the urban kampongs, so the urban slum areas in the area within the broader vicinity of the gentrified part of Jakarta. And he asked the security guard once more to confirm where the mosque was, and then he went to the slum area, in which he could feel that there's a stark contrast between the Singapore style, he said, of the bus stops, of the hospital, of the housing compounds, and the reality of having to do his Friday prayers in an urban slum area, not more than 1 kilometer from where the hospital is. So this kind of inequality is it's experienced on an everyday level, and it's racialized, it's aligned with religious identity and sentiments, and the protective bubble that is built throughout decades through consumerism, through the way of life, through rituals, both privatized and communal rituals, are put in a place that is in unequal power positions in the narratives that they consume on social media and mass media. And these aggravations, thus, during moments of strong political struggles or high pressure electoral political moments, are expressed along these religious and racial lines. And this is a phenomenon that also appeared in our study in comparison to Turkey, Egypt, and India. Some of the elites there, political elites there, such as Modi, for instance, was not part of the old elites, was not part of the Congress party. He's from the BJP party, and he did not have initially access to mainstream media that is traditionally owned as part of the Nehru dynasty. And Modi was very popular on the Twitter social media, and he was able to mobilize his following through these hardline narratives along similar religious and racial lines. although in very specific historical and cultural contexts. Some of the keywords that appeared across the countries that we studied, I wrote a chapter on the political language of Islamic populism with Fedi Hadis, are this: hashtag Neo-Ottoman, the action to defend Islam, beef ban in Modi's India, in which policies, strong policies that banned the purchasing and consuming of beef during the Eid al-Adha across the minority Muslims in India went viral. And this virality was succeeded by incidents of violence towards Muslim carrying out the rituals, even though in fact it wasn't, they weren't consuming beef, but goat. So these are the incidences in which discursive moments on social media can actually be aggravated and mobilized into physical and material conditions. Next is why and how this happens. So when there are narratives, there are strong labels, strong lexicons that that appeal to feelings of being marginalized and directing this frustration towards the elite that this social base is perceived to have taken away their power. It is actually a cultural resource pool. It can be played into things if there are pushes from political parties, from politicians, from incumbent or opposition politicians to use languages to mobilize aspirations, and usually the narratives, the political campaigners use narratives of equality and justice, but very little explanation about which policies, which promises, campaign promises, actually realize equality and justice. So these lexicons are waved around, flagged around in ways that are abstract, and they're deliberately abstract so that when they cannot realize it materially, there's no consequence, political consequence. And the effect to this is that in Indonesia, one of the main clerics that supported the demonstration was the former head of the Indonesia Ulama Council, slowly and gradually became part of the 2019 presidential campaign with the current president Joko Widodo, who ran against Prabowo then, who had more direct support from Islamist political parties. And Maruf Amin is currently the vice president. He's also part of the largest, one of the two largest Muslim organizations, Nahdlatul Ulama, known for their plural leanings. But in the case of the anti-Christian Chinese governor, he issued the fatwa that justified not choosing an infidel leader for the larger Muslim voters. So at these moments, there can be political legitimacy after the demonstration, despite the fact that these were mobilizations of lexicons. There was not a strong social and political basis to support or go against Ahok at that moment. Basuki Cahayapurnama, the Christian Chinese governor at that moment, but it crystallized into political positions, solidified political positions for Islamist leaders in the 2019 presidential elections, and he's still reigning until today. And this is a phenomenon, and this is an illustration that many of the scholars in Indonesia and Asia think will continue on. Our counterparts in the Philippines, in Thailand, study about this as well, and we are concerned about the factionalization of the progressive voices that are traditionally criticizing the downsliding or democratic setbacks that are occurring in Southeast Asia. The factionalization also happens with identity politics. So some of the progressive academics, public intellectuals, and civil society proponents who are pro-democracy are also divided across religious and racial lines, and these usually occur through social media and messenger platforms. I think my time is up, so I'll try to wrap up. We think that they're deeply interlinked with inequalities, with the concentration of wealth, and the way they're expressed, politically expressed and culturally expressed on social media is a symptom of deeper wealth and social inequalities. And unfortunately, we think that this is a condition that will continue on, not only in Indonesia, but in many parts around the world. I'm going to return the floor back to Professor Yilmaz. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Inaya Rakhmani. That was a very good presentation, and I'm sure there will be some questions for you. Our second speaker is Professor Pradana Boy, and he'll be speaking about radicalism, extremism, and civilizationalist populism in Indonesia. Over to you, Professor Pradana.
Thank you, Professor Yilmaz. Good afternoon from Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen, and also fellow presenters. First of all, I'd like to offer.
He can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Yilmaz. Good afternoon to you all from Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen, fellow presenters. First of all, I'd like to offer my gratitude to Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalisation, Deakin University, Australia, and also European Center for Population Studies for having me in this very respectful session. So, Dr. Rakhmani has talked about politics aspect of Indonesian populism, and I'm sure that this have enriched our theoretical as well as empirical understanding to the dynamic of populism in Indonesia. So in attempt to draw different angle from what Dr. Rakhmani and later other panelists will discover, my talk will touch populism in its relation to religious literacy and how it brought effects to religious life in Indonesia. And more specifically, it will touch the question how populism in religious literacy correlate with extremism and radicalism. The thesis I'm developing in this talk are, firstly, in this digital age where internet as part of our life, internet basically has transformed as a new public sphere where any discussion can take place and public discourse and on religion is, of course, not an exception. Then my next hypothesis is that the emergence of internet as a new public sphere where discourse on religion take place has caused fundamental changes in religious discourse from elite domains to popular domain. When religious discourse has become public or popular domains, it does not only change the method how Islam is studied, but also from my observation, it has arbitrarily destroyed the traditional hierarchy of religious authority holders. And lastly, when religious discourse turn to be popular domain, religious teaching are superficially understood. Islamic symbolism is preferred in dispense of Islamic value, and combined with the domination of conservatism on digital realm, religious literacy populism potentially contributes to the spread of extremism and radicalism. So these 3 points that I am going to develop in this very brief presentation. To begin with, allow me to portray a phenomenon which, for the lack of better term, I will call it the Internet Islam. So to describe the first phenomenon that I have touched before, so I call it Internet Islam. Other scholars might have used this term or other terms like this with all its variations. But in most cases, what I mean with Internet Islam is a kind of religious dynamics influenced by the digitalization of human life, where internet has become the main source of Islamic learning for public. Public in this context does not merely refer to lay people or lay Muslim, more specifically, but also academia and other learning circle, as I believe that factually not only public in the meaning of lay Muslim who are affected by widespread of internet as medium of learning, rather it also brought the transformation to the nature of teaching of Islam in academia and religious learning circle, even the traditional one. So if we look at the studies on Islamic learning in this digital age, actually many studies have been conducted by scholars of any disciplines. Among the earliest generation of this study is what in 2 decades ago conducted by Gary Bunch in 2003. In early 2000, Bunch pioneered a study on the impacts of digital world to the ways Islam is discussed, perceived, and practiced within Muslim societies. Moreover, in next decades, being consistent with his study on Islam and the digital transformation, in 2018, Bunch extended his examination on how internet transformed the landscape of religious authority in Islam. Other scholars focusing on the issue or the same issue, such as Dale Eichelman, Goran Larsen, El Nawawi and Hamis, Lothar Haber, Campbell and Surisia, and also Robert Rosenhal, to mention only a few names. With all the nuance, basically they all meant to examine the influence of information technology revolution to the formation of religious orientation in contemporary Muslim societies. I believe that internet is one of public speech, as Zizi Papacharisi in 2018 shows that internet as a virtual space has turned into a public sphere. Through this development, in the context of political life, we don't only know what is traditionally called as citizen, but also what is called, but also the citizen of digital world, popularly known as netizen. So I think these two terms that are already popular in our life today. In this context, however, I distinguish between citizen and netizen. The demarcating features of citizen and netizen, not only in the fact that the former is real, calculable, and measurable, while the latter is unreal, cannot be calculated, and immeasurable, but also to more substantive characters, such as the citizens are responsible to their words and action, and to a certain extent, they follow rational logic of thinking. Netizen, on the other hand, this is my belief, are largely irresponsibly authoritarian. So in building the discourse, they are very irresponsibly authoritarian. Netizen build any discourse on the internet, including religious discourse, in irresponsible way and ignore the rational logic of thinking. In an Indonesian context, from time to time, the destructive tendency brought by netizen attitude is much likely to increase. A figure presented by the Association of Internet Providers showed that internet users in Indonesia are considerably huge. In the first place, West Java is the Indonesian province with the highest number of internet users, namely around 35 million. In the second place, Central Java with approximately 27 million users, while East Java with the number of internet users estimated around 26 million people are in the third place. So the total numbers of internet users in these three provinces alone is around 88 million, which makes up around 1/3 of total Indonesian population. Furthermore, the meaning of this figure is that internet is a popular mean for discourse building, which has transformed the nature of religious discourse from elite domain into popular domain. The problem with internet is that the truth of a discourse is not defined by the logic of rational thinking, of the soundness of the soundness of the argument, but rather it is based on the click. Consequently, the more click given to a discourse, the wider opportunity it has for being a public discourse. So this is the first point. And then now we come to how internet pose challenge to traditional religious institution and authority. The most serious impact of populism in religious literacy is the challenge to traditional institution and authority. Allow me to share my personal experience. From a personal ground, my experience with a student da'wah organization led me to a reflection that challenge to traditional religious institution and authority are prevalent. In between 2015 to 2018, I was a supervisor for student da'wah organization in my university. This is a formal position as I was officially appointed by university. On one day, executive committee of the organization came to see me, consulting their plan to organize an event they call Klinik Hukum Islam or Islamic Law Clinic. In their imagination, the clinic will open for university members from student, administrative staff, and professors. The event will serve as consultative dialogue for those who have problem or question regarding Islamic law, ranging from daily life issues to more intellectual ones. My reaction was natural, actually. I saw this is a very good plan, but then I realized such an event must invite the involvement of senior scholars in Islamic law or those who are well-versed in Islamic legal discourse. Then I asked them, who will be the resource person, or in a more technical term, mufti for this Islamic law clinic? When they replied, it did not only make me surprised, rather their answer shocked me. Very shock was in very immediate reaction, as they said, we will serve as the mufti. My unnatural reaction this time was because they are students. Not only that they are students, they are not students who are studying Islamic law or Islamic studies in general, and all of them are studying secular, quote-unquote, secular science such as engineering, economics, husbandry, and agriculture. Then I raised a question to them. On what basis that all of you feel capable of being the doctors in Islamic law clinic? Are you sufficiently qualified to answer any problems related to Islamic law, which involves, for example, status of halal and haram, and philosophical understanding of Islamic law principles? And I become more surprised when their response is yes. So to the question, they say yes. And then the basis where they base such a claim is that they say to me, we have studied Islamic law through the internet. So my point is, this personal experience brought me to a reflection that Islamic religious literacy populism has significantly contributed to the shift of religious authority existence within Muslim societies, or at least perception of lay Muslim on religious authority holders. In this case, I quote Gary Bunn, who said that the use of internet is significant in the way it sometimes subverts traditional models of religious authority and offers alternative approaches and information. So the last part will be about how religious literacy populism on the internet, especially, bring to the spread of extremism and radicalism. So allow me to quote the former head of National Bureau of Terrorism Eradication, Soehardi Alois. He said that the internet is one important media where terrorism or radicalism or any extremism thought, extreme thought on Islam is spread. The data from 2018, for example, Ministry of Information revealed that in this year, the ministry has banned around 10,000 content on the internet which show radical orientation. So the question is why studying religion on internet can easily bring young generation to radicalism and extremism, because in general term, I observe that studying religion on internet offer a shallowness of understanding, and then the other one is it offer instant thinking and instant answer on anything, so it's preferable by many people. And we also found the fact that 58% youth study religion from the internet. They prefer popularism, not the soundness of argument or discourse, but rather the more practical one. They will take the more practical one. And the last one, the internet is dominated by conservative orientation activists, as research by UIN Syarif Hidayatullah in Jakarta, so that around 60% of internet Islamic content in Indonesian context are dominated by conservative group, while those progressive are less involved in internet Islamic discourse. So this all that I can present today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Pradana. We'll come back to you with some questions later. Now it's time for our third speaker, Dr. Kurniawati Hastuti Dewi. She is the senior researcher at the Research Center for Politics, National Research and Innovation Agency of Indonesia. And she'll be talking on gender roles in Indonesia's religious populism. Over to you, Dr. Kurniawati.
Thank you so much, Professor Ihsan. Thank you so much for all the distinguished speakers. I would like to say my thanks to Deakin University, Australia, and the European Center for Populism Studies for having me in this important event. So allow me to share my short PowerPoint, and hopefully I can finish by 15 minutes. So
can you make it full screen?
Okay.
Yep, that's better.
You see, okay, thank you so much. So I make a little adjustment in the title because I'm basically a researcher. So what I would like to share is based on some of my major research and then some of my quick observation of the current situation in Indonesia. So this is 2019 general elections. We have the first to be concurrent legislative and presidential election in April 17, 2019, with around 50.6 female voters. So this is very, potential voters among presidential candidate at the time. We have two presidential candidates in 2019, Jokowi and Ma'ruf Amin. and then the second one is Prabowo and Sandi. So there was interesting saying by Sandi, Prabowo Sandi, I mean the vice presidential candidate at the time, during the day of his registration to the General Election Commission. She said that we will fight for emak-emak, and then we want to create affordable food prices for emak-emak. So basically, in his speech, he works like to fight for the ordinary people of especially emak-emak, or we call it ordinary mother, something like that. And Jokowi and Ma'ruf Amin also has kind of relawan or voluntary from emak-emak side. We call relawan emak militan Jokowi Indonesia, or MG. So these two what we call interesting news pointing out to me that actually important aspect of women, especially motherhood, are playing a lot during the 2019 presidential election. This is some highlighted news in the Detik News, one of the portal in Indonesia, which describing how Sandiaga Uno try to focusing on emak-emak in some market, and then on the other hand, in the Jokowi side also doing the same. So actually, in the 2019 presidential election, I would like to know about how is the contestation between the power of emak-emak and Ibu Bangsa. Ibu Bangsa is actually the term that then endorsed by the President Jokowi candidate of the other president, which is Jokowi, and how it is placed in the gender and populism discussion. And then interesting what do you call movement before the 2019 presidential election. There was a series of debate among Indonesian women activists in Kompas newspaper, very prominent newspaper in Indonesia. For example, by Ani Sucipto, in which in response to the PMI of Prabowo Sandi versus MG or Jokowi side of emak-emak, and then Ani Sucipto see this as a subordination of women politics within the electoral political competition only. It was published in 8 September 2018. And then it's followed by Secretary General of Indonesian Women Coalition, in which she didn't agree with the term of emak-emak, because according to her, it is lowering women's sense of what we call authority, and it's just representing women of lower education and then uneducated women. So according to her, emak is not suitable to represent women's movement. It is in place only to, emak is married woman. And another discourse followed by Nur Syahbani Kaca Sungkana, in which she agreed with the term emak-emak, because she believed this term representing the success of Indonesian women movement to educating ordinary women. And then another woman activist, Sitari Purnami, she said that emak is the initial subject who affected by the insufficient public policy. So by this following discourse in the Indonesian newspaper, I can see how in the 2019 presidential election, in the upcoming election, there was a mounting debate among Indonesian women activists, some social cleavage, and then I then follow with further discussion with 11 women activists in Indonesia. And then this was a result of my interview and deep observation, in which basically what term the power of emak-emak and Ibu Bangsa has kind of similarity, in which they drawing up from motherhood identity of Indonesian woman, but emak-emak emphasizes the ordinary mother who have to be aware of and involved in political practice to ensure that their needs meet in the policymaker. But the Ibu Bangsa emphasizes the role of women as educated and progressive and politically active subject. So Ibu Bangsa rather more elitist subject or elitist narrative compared to the emak-emak, which is more ordinary. And then how I look at it into the discourse of gender and populism. So according to my understanding or my reading on populism in politics, actually the study of gender and populism are rather unexplored or remain underexplored before. And then it's also said by Mukadam, little has been written about non-Western populist movement and its attendant gender dynamic, including how the populist regime appealed to women voters. So there is many references on gender and populism in Latin America, but according to my understanding, very little references on gender and populism in Asia, including, for example, especially in Indonesia. So, for example, Sandi used the term the power of Amma to appeal to women as ordinary mother, as it gives them a sense of being empowered as a subject in the 2019 presidential election, with the promise to reducing the price of the staple food. And then the Amma has become one of the major campaigning bodies by the Prabowo Sandi. And then it's also suited with Rousseau's note that woman can function in populism as a generic political category, which is often used to enhance popular identification of the leaders. So definitely Prabowo and Sandi use the motherhood identity of ordinary working class woman or Amma in her campaign, and it's become of her important vision, to empower the ordinary woman. While Ibu Bangsa, what you call, actually endorsed by presidential candidate of Jokowi, if Ibu Bangsa, according to my interview, is the extension of motherhood identity as necessary for the protection of Indonesian nation, and then its narrative more recall have this feminist elite nuance compared to the emak-emak. So presidential candidate Jokowi at the time actually endorsed the term Ibu Bangsa in Yogyakarta in 2018, and then at the time what we call Kowani, one of the umbrella organization of Indonesian women organization in Indonesia, officially launched the Ibu Bangsa term, and then they do not agree with the power of emak-emak jargon. And then at the time, presidential candidate Jokowi also supported the term Ibu Bangsa, and then it's become an highlighted term in one of the newspaper in Yogyakarta. So about in 2024 general election. So we will have this 2024 general election. There will be the election date on February 40, 2024, and all the election process already began from now. And then we currently at the moment, we have these three what we call strong presidential candidate. The first is Anies Baswedan from Koalisi Perubahan. The second is Prabowo Subianto from Koalisi Kebangsaan. And the third one is Ganjar Pranowo from PDIP. So PDIP is the ruling party in Indonesia. So he's come from the ruling party at the moment. So how about the possibility of playing the gender card, Islam, and what we call the rising of radicalization in Indonesia? One of the important events last year, around December 2022, there was a special special envoy of LGBT, Jessica Stern. Jessica Stern would like to visit Indonesia, but it was cancelled because of mounting debate among Indonesian Indonesian groups, Indonesian group, either conservative or moderate groups. All of them are opposing this kind of movement or the plan to the coming of this Jessica in Indonesia. So another event it will coming on November this year is the Coldplay concert in Indonesia, and then there is an association in which the Coldplay has kind of link with the LGBT movement, and then it's the Indonesian the Indonesian Council of Ulama and some conservative groups also opposing this concert in Indonesia, although publics are happy with this kind of concert. So according to my observation, the presidential candidates in 2024 general elections will definitely touching this kind of populist issue among Muslim voters in Indonesia, because this is the context and the current situation in the upcoming 2024 general election, which is not happened in 2019 general election. And then as I said, the religious groups and the political parties will playing this wave, how they can erasing the influence in the upcoming 2024 general election by using, the kind of narrative of family resilience, family strengthening family, and maybe some using the anti-feminist movement, because in Indonesia, in the last 10 years, we also see the rising or the strengthening of conservative groups, especially in social media, which is already studied by many scholars in Indonesia. And this is also related to rising of the digital technology, is mentioned by previous scholars, and how the changing family structure also actually happened in Indonesia. And nowadays in post-reformasi Indonesia, there was a contestation between a lot of contestation in the public sphere between the moderate and conservative groups in Indonesia. So this is only one of the one of example how the contestation between the conservative and moderate groups in Indonesia. For example, there is term called ketahanan keluarga from the conservative groups, and versus, for example, tuntunan menuju keluarga sakinah, which was published by Muhammadiyah and Aisyah in revised edition in 2016. Because I'm also doing some research on this book, Tuntunan Menuju Keluarga Sakinah. In the current revision in 2016, this book published by Muhammadiyah and Aisyah already accommodated what we call the possibility that family should have more balance and equal relationship between husband and wife, that a family should not be patriarchal, something like that. And then they definitely opposing polygamy officially in this book. So this is, for me, is very progressive compared to what I call another Islamic groups in Indonesia. On the other hand, we also see the rising of conservative group with this another concept of family, as I mentioned before. And then this is just an example how what we call during the COVID-19 situation, there was many new social experiences in which women and men have to work at home, and then perhaps in some family they have very good balanced gender relation, in which the husband can help the mother or wife to do the household things, but in some family they don't. So I'm criticizing some of the what we call the tendency, the popular tendency still depicting men during the work from home situation as the man producer or the man breadwinner, while the woman are taking care of the household. But my criticism was then countered by another conservative groups. So we can see that publicly this kind of what we call mounting debate about the family is also one of the important things to be considered by populist groups in Indonesia. And just happened now, this is still very hot. Indonesian women's movement now united together to fight on the possibility of the decline of women representation in Indonesian politics in the upcoming election because of the birth of PKPU number 10 2023. I will not go into detail, but the regulation by General Election Commission potentially will reduce the number of women representation in the upcoming election. That's why Indonesian women's movement are united to fight for a better law. This is example how the social media and the united effort among the Indonesian women movement across social groups. And then because of this situation, I don't think there will be a cleavage among Indonesian women movement as happened in 2019 election. Because of the situation is relatively different. The cleavage in 2019 elections happened because of, early cleavage in 2014 presidential election, and then mounting in the 2017 DKI Jakarta election, in which there was Ahok or Basuki Cahayapurnama candidacy, and then it's again really mounting in 2019 presidential election among these two camp of women activists who were divided. But these situations doesn't happen now, and then many energy are focusing on the effort to increasing representation of women in the parliament. So this is my some concluding notes. In the 2019 presidential election, there is no hegemony in producing narrative on contemporary Indonesian women's role in politics within masculine political sphere, because Indonesian women's movement actively debating and producing discourse on gender and women in politics. And through the Ama-Ama and Ibu Bangsa, we can see how the dimension of classes, sexuality, and language representation of women are being played by these two sections of women's movement. Populist narrative by using the term of Ama-Ama and everyday need of the men, then elitist narrative by the word of Ibu Bangsa. However, both narrative of Ama-Ama and Ibu Bangsa no longer accepted domestication of women only at home, but Indonesian women should be active in politics. And there was also a cleavage among Indonesian women movement. But in 2019 general election, the discourse among women activists is not as active as before, perhaps because it's different context now. And then we have another, presidential candidate, because the Jokowi president candidate at that time already two term from 2014 until 2019, and perhaps the group which is supported Jokowi from 2014 and continue until 2019, and they are creating this term of centering on womanhood in Indonesia. But we have new candidate which is different from Jokowi, so maybe there was stopping what we call momentum among these women activists. And then focusing on issue advocating on the setback of representation of Indonesian women, and now it still happen now. And then gender sexuality issue in campaign. Interestingly, it's become unifying voices among the Islamic groups in Indonesia, either conservative or moderate groups, because of this new context of LGBT movement, in which all the presidential candidate or the legislative candidate will play the waves. And then this is some key point of important program that maybe will be promoted by the groups about the family, about the motherhood, and I would like to see any continuity or changes. And then how is young voters' voices and practical programs addressed by the candidate. And then there is a dimension of gender and age in here, which would be what we call considering further. And then in here, what we call, because of this context in Indonesia, which is not happened during the last election in 2019, so perhaps all the Islamic groups, either conservative or moderate, seem united with this common issue. And then presidential candidate or legislative candidate will easily draw, or maybe the the voters will easily draw the line between who is the Islamist and who is not the Islamic, and this too risky for those who will defining themselves as non-Islamics. So I think I stop my presentation in here, because I apologize for any shortcoming, because the last half of my presentation is based on my quick observation of the current situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dewi. That was very useful. And I have several questions for you. I don't know if I will have time, especially about the 2024 elections next year. So let's move on to our next and last speaker, Dr. Gede Wahyu Wicaksana. He's an senior international relations lecturer in the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, University of Erlangga, Indonesia. He'll be looking at the issue from another angle, which we haven't covered so far. It's foreign policy dimension, international relations dimension. So his title is Populism and Foreign Policy, the Indonesian Case. Over to you, Dr. Gede. Are you there? Yes.
Sorry, it is muted.
Okay, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go on, perfect.
Yes, thanks, Professor. Let me also thanks to the center and the institute for giving me the chance to speak at this wonderful forum. My greetings, warm greetings to the distinguished speakers, the excellent presenters, and the kind participants of this seminar. Before I go through the topics of foreign policy and populism in the context of contemporary Indonesia, let me make two general statements of the populism studies on foreign policy in Indonesia. Number one is we should acknowledge that despite the voluminous, numerous efforts have been diverted, very few works has been published on foreign policy dimensions of populism in Indonesia. Although populism is something very phenomenal, very interesting in world politics, but many do not want to look more deeply into this phenomenon. Perhaps because of the lack of theoretical and methodological instruments to help the studies in this area. However, it brings me to my number two statements. So it gives me broad space to contribute to the study. Beside my other interests in general foreign policy subjects, international relations theory, and the Indo-Pacific great power politics, populism is quite intriguing because Indonesian foreign policy and ideology are two things that are not easy to separate. There is always a connection between ideologies and foreign policy in Indonesia, even though the dominant feature of ideology is nationalism, and populism is the light version of nationalistic ideologies, or what the Dutch scholar Mood says, a tin-centered ideology sticking to nationalism and others. But I can discover some records of populist foreign policy in Indonesia. I want to make an argument countering some scholars who say that populism is not a factor to Indonesian foreign policy. I would say populism is not without influence on foreign policy. We need to be aware the practice and expressions of populist leaders in Indonesian international affairs are not similar to what Trump, Bolsonaro, Johnson, and even Erdogan or Duterte do to create the populist foreign policy identities. However, populism has something to do with the way Indonesia, at least the way some leaders of the country conduct international relations. To understand the constraints, I prefer to use the concept constraints instead of saying that populism is completely absent in the state foreign policy. It is constrained, and I will explore three major constraints of populist rhetoric and action in Indonesian foreign policy. Their historical legacy, economic cooperation, and the current international order. I will examine one by one. Starting from a colonial nation, a post-colonial state of Indonesia was born out in the midst of two-stage conflicts: domestic, ideological, and political conflicts between three main streams of political forces: the Islamic political forces, the nationalists, the secular nationalists, and the socialists. On the other side, Indonesia, the Indonesian Republic, was facing the threats of dividing great power Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Many literature, many historians have described and explained how these two games created Indonesian foreign policy. As a result, the nationalist leaders, especially Muhammad Hatta, presented Indonesia as an independent and active foreign policy state, a state who do not want to be dictated by global powers, and the state who only want to pursue its perceived vital national interests. The meaning of independent and active, if we look at it more deeply, it suggests pragmatism. Pragmatism because to avoid further destruction of destabilization due to domestic political conflicts between the three major powers, then Hatta, Sukarno, and other founding fathers of the country choose to be independent, choose to be active, and they behave pragmatically. Pragmatic means although we care about ideology, we want to pursue our state ideology, but we need to make friends with everyone, because Indonesia was devastated by colonialism and imperialism, and it needed to develop its economy, social welfare, and to maintain political stability. So during the formative years of the Indonesian national building, 1945 to 1965, pragmatism was the most prominent characteristics of Indonesian foreign policy. Nevertheless, Sukarno, in his final years, revived the ideology politics. And to some extent, Sukarno talk and act like a populist. If we use Mood and Muller conception of populism as anti-elitism and anti-pluralism, Sukarno did something nearly perfect like a populist leader. He described the West as imperial elites, and he urged the third world as the colonized, as the people, as the populace who struggle for their autonomy in international politics. And Sukarno described Indonesians as a large number of populists who struggle to secure their heartland. The concept of heartland is central to populist foreign policy because it's denotes a country, a land which is exploited by global elites and impoverished by the international capitalist owners or states, let's say the industrial countries. And during the years of Suharto, who revised domestic political system and redirected Indonesian foreign policy, the course of pragmatism was revealed. Suharto did not care about ideology, and he moved toward the West for economic donors, financial assistance, and to keep Southeast Asia as a stable region. And Suharto constructed a regional organization which persists until now, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the values, norms, and institutions developed through ASEAN is quite contradictory to populist future, which is ASEAN is inclusive, cooperative, less provocative. Let us compare to how Erdogan, for instance, deplored the European Union as a transnational bureaucratic and an authoritarian regime. ASEAN does never use that terms. And in my latest study about populism published in Australian Journal of International Affairs last year, I argue that pragmatism impedes or pragmatism hinders the complete the advanced expressions of populism in Indonesia's foreign policy. I move to the second factor, economic cooperation. Along the history of Indonesian foreign affairs, we can notice that economic interest is the most important aspects of the country's international relations. Whoever the presidents, whoever the leaders, the foreign ministers, they are obliged to keep Indonesia as a stable nation, Southeast Asia as a peaceful region, to support economic development. Today we can see Jokowi is quite pragmatic in carrying out the state foreign policy. He makes very close relations with China. It maintains relationship with the US. It improves relation with the Middle East, Europe, and Widodo, Jokowi is trying to boost Indonesian military relations with some major powers, and this kind of policy trajectory disallows hard or high-tune populist expression and action in the country's foreign policy. However, let me emphasize, there were some moments under Jokowi's presidency when he looked like presenting a populist foreign policy. The case in point is how Jokowi assisted or launched humanitarian aid to help Rohingya Muslims because of the repression by the Myanmar military. Jokowi visited the Rohingya and he identified himself and Indonesians as brothers of the suppressed Rohingya. Although Jokowi did not mention the junta military leaders of Myanmar as repressive elites, but it sent a message that Jokowi wanted to be more populist. It was of course related to domestic politics. At least Jokowi wanted to show to the Muslims voters that he had Islamic credential after the fall of Ahok in Jakarta. Afterward, I could not discover a stronger populist expression in Indonesian foreign policy, as foreign policy remains the instrument to pursue economic interests. And finally, I want to claim that the regional and international order making Indonesia further not to be a populist foreign policy state. Indonesia is facing the rising, the intensifying competition between China and the US, and South China Sea is the nearest hotspot, the nearest conflict zone, which can threaten Indonesian national sovereignty, and it is impossible for Indonesia to act like a populist who fight China and move toward the US or otherwise. Once Indonesian leaders try to ally with any great powers, it means violating the independent and active. Even though many states condemn Russia for staging war in the Ukraine, many Indonesians will favor Vladimir Putin. It demonstrates that there is a feeling, a sentiment of anti-establishment expressed by the public, but the foreign policy elites could not facilitate this feeling and shape a populist or anti-Western foreign policy, because Indonesia is not great power. Indonesia is a middle power. It has limited economic and military capacity. It's not the order builder in the region, and it is just a follower of the established regional and international orders. To conclude, let me stress my argument. There is an impact of populism in the state foreign policy in some historical moments, in some political events, but it is restricted by the pragmatic economic interest and the real global and regional situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jaksana. And this concludes our panel. Of course, we'll have the Q&A session, and we have about half an hour, which is excellent. We prefer that you ask your question directly, but if you don't want to do that, you can just write your question in the chat function, and I will read it. But before allowing you to ask the question, I'll just use my authoritarian powers, and I'll ask the first question myself. So my question is to all panelists. If you can answer from your own perspective, your own presentation's perspective, I would be delighted. So who is the elite in the narrative of these populists in Indonesia? Of course, there are many populist actors, not just one, not just only religious populists, but also technocratic populists and secular populists. So different populist actors could be seeing different elite in opposition to the people in their narratives. So are these economic elite, the rich people? Are these the non-Muslims? Are these the Chinese Christians or pro-Western people in the country? Secular people in the country, secular sections of society or bureaucracy or military. So this is my first part of the question. So who is the elite in the definition or narrative of these populists, different populists, and how do they see the elite? And the second part is their conspiracy theories. So what kind of conspiracy theories do they have? They don't have to, but as far as we know, most populists have these conspiracy theories. At least the essential element is that the elite is working, this corrupt or evil elite is working against the interest of the people. They are depriving them of their sovereignty, the will of the people, and they are simply stealing it away from it and destroying democracy so that the voice of the people, sovereignty of the people is not there. They simply try to rule all society. So this is a conspiracy, but there are other conspiracies, anti-Western conspiracies. Christian crusaders are trying to invade Muslim lands, or Zionist Israeli lobby, they're puppets in our lands, or China or Chinese Christians. So according to these different populist actors, what are these conspiracy theories? So first, who is the elite in their narrative? And secondly, what is their conspiracy theory in relation to their populist narrative? So can I start with you, Professor Inaya Rakhmani?
Sure, Professor Yilmaz. The elite here is a convergence of political business oligarchs, and some of the populist narratives that have been studied firstly show a strong social basis for the current PDIP party, incumbent party, supporting the current president, with the as a political party that was inherited, founded by Sukarno, the first president pre-independence. And in this narrative, the people is portrayed as peasants, farmers, and the working class, and they have a strong social basis in the Java Island. Another narrative is more of the kind of populist approaches part of the folk that was popularized by current President Jokowi in his running during the 2012 mayoral candidacy in Solo, Central Java. He was often portrayed in social media and mainstream media as belusukan, or going into the small alleyways of urban areas, especially the slum areas and markets. This kind of persona was really instrumental, according to many scholars and pundits, in his rising popularity during his gubernatorial candidacy in Jakarta and his presidential candidacy in 2019. And then the third is Islamic populism, without a clear political party and unclear social basis, because the Ummah has a very abstract notion. None of the Islamist political parties in Indonesia have a strong social basis. It's very much fragmented, and this was a legacy from the New Order's authoritarian regimes, depoliticization of Islamist movements that was quite successful. So the elite is also fragmented in competition and in struggle to obtain power, but new kinds of alliances can be formed across politicians and political parties without a strong social basis, such as the case with Joko Widodo and Ma'ruf Amin. Ma'ruf Amin was the former chairman of the Indonesia Ulama Council that issued the fatwa against Chinese Christian governor so that Muslims cannot vote for infidel leaders. So these are a dynamic, a power struggle, and there is no unified or monolithic elite. There are clear business and political interests that converge, closing into the elections. I hope that answers your question. Over to you again, Professor Yilmaz.
Thank you. So Professor Wijaksana is leaving, but do you want to answer the question before you leave, or?
No, I'm not leaving.
Oh, you're not leaving?
No.
Okay, sorry. Okay, there is a message in the chat function, but yeah. Okay, Professor Kurniawati, sorry. There was some glitch, I think in the system, so your name was there. Yeah, okay, over to you, Professor Wijaksana.
I think I agree with Dr. Inaya saying that the populist actors are those politicians who are trying to popularize or to improve their popularity. They have business and large vested interests to reap economic benefits to strengthen their grassroots political basis. So although Indonesian politics is not about populism, but politicians in Indonesia cannot be not populist. They must have a populist dimensions in their political appearance, rhetoric, and programs. Jokowi is truly a populist. If I use Levitsky concepts of populism, he comes from a non-elite background. He spent most of his career outside political parties. He does not have political affiliations with elites, and he came to politics with an idea to improve social and economic prosperity for the poor through social and economic reforms programs. Jokowi does not talk a lot about populism in international relations, contrary to his former rival Prabowo Subianto, who is an ultra-nationalist. Although he is pragmatist, Prabowo became populist in times close to elections, and after 2019 he moderated his populist view. Prabowo used to say that Indonesian wealth was robbed by foreigners, and he expressed dislike toward China. He wanted Indonesia to be more independent, stronger militarily. He wanted to be closer to non-Western, anti-Western powers. But when he becomes defense minister, he advanced Indonesian military connections with French, with NATO, and with the US. So it gives me an impression that the populist actors is quite pragmatic. The Islamic populism, yes, I agree that some elements of the Islamic groups express populist politics, but because they are out of the government and they cannot participate in shaping an Islamic-oriented foreign policy for the current government.
Thank you, Professor Pradana.
Thank you, Professor Yilmaz. When we talk about populism in terms of religious discourse, I would say that the meaning of populist or elite, popular and elite might be a bit different from political realm. What I mean is that there is a strong tendency for public to be elite of a religious discourse, which in this context refers to strong public imagination that they are the holder of religious authority. So by saying elite in religious discourse, actually what I imagine is the holder of religious authority. The problem is with Islamic populism today in Indonesia, we refer to what I call religious literacy populism, is more and more public want to be the holders of religious authority without any formal procedure that the formal holders of religious authority have been taken so far. For example, we have Majelis Ulama Indonesia or Indonesian Council for Religious or Muslim Scholars, which is the holder of religious authority for Indonesian Muslim in general. We have those who from Muhammadiyah members, for example, they have Muhammadiyah ulama, Muhammadiyah scholars, and also from Nahdlatul Ulama. So within this respective organization, we have body of religious authority holders. But then laymen who are not well versed in religion also compete for this authority. so this is the situation with Indonesian religious discourse. If we talk about which one is elite, so which one is popular. So the public want to be elite, but they tend to ignore the formal capacity or the formal steps should be taken for a group or maybe individual to be the holder of religious authority. So, that's the first thing that we have to be aware when we talk about populism and elitism in context of Indonesian religious discourse. The second one, I would say that democracy has actually facilitated the promotion of many religious discourse in Indonesia from diverse orientation. But some populist Muslim group, they reject democracy. Actually, they can be acknowledged, they can be given certain room for express their position or their orientation is because of democracy, but then they reject democracy. So in this kind of thing, we can still see the domain actually related to the competition of religious authority. That's for me, Professor Yilmaz. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have some questions in the chat function. Bülent, do you want to go and ask yourself, or should I read your question?
You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me find. Yeah, that's a long question. I express my sincere appreciation for the captivating presentations. This is Bülent speaking, not me. I would like to address my question to Dr. Wahyu Wijaksana, delving into the consequential implications of cultural, social, economic, and political residues originating from the colonial era. Specifically, I aim to investigate their influence on the multifaceted expressions of populism, polarization, and radicalization witnessed in contemporary Indonesia, colonialism's influence. In light of this, I am curious to explore potential connections between the current issues pertaining to populism and radicalization in Indonesia and the lasting legacy of colonization. What are your assessments on this context?
Yes, I directly answer, or you want to?
Yes, please go on.
Okay. Thanks for the very insightful question. if we trace back the history of Indonesian Revolution, there were two methods, two tools used by the nationalist leaders to achieve independence. Number one is by using diplomacy. We call it struggle diplomacy. And number two was through people revolution. Both sides of the foreign policy tools has populist dimensions. I give you an example. When India organized the Asian Relations Conference in 1947 and 1949, both were aimed to help the independence struggles of fellow Asians, and Indonesia came and talked about how colonialism had brought millions people suffering, millions millions of dollars losses, and it impoverished, and they impoverished the Indonesian nation. At that conference, it was the first time Indonesia expressed that our independent struggle is to equalize the status of popular third world people and the colonial elites of the West. So Indonesia wanted to reconstruct the international order, the hierarchical orders, into an egalitarian orders. It is very, very populist oriented, and it is diplomatic struggle. So colonialism matters in constructing these populist ideas. On the battlefields where Indonesia struggled with bamboos, with weak military arsenals, with limited military arsenals, with untrained soldiers, what solidified this movement is the populist rhetoric, that there were people having similar destiny, having similar objective to free from Western colonialism. People with different cultures coming from large numbers of ethnic groups, having different historiographies, and they could be united by a populist discourse to free their nation from the hands of imperial powers. Although it has something with nationalism, but in this case, populism is the more practical expression of the solid nationalist ideology established in Indonesia. This is my argument. Hopefully it helps.
Thank you.
Ihsan, if you permit me, I want to make a
Please go on.
Yes, please.
Do you think that these Pancasila principles also a result of this process, or just another thing?
Pancasila has a different historical context. I read that Pancasila came out of compromise between the nationalists and the Islamists. I don't know whether these terms is correct. I think other speakers may correct my misunderstanding. But Pancasila was a compromise between two nationalist forces, the secular on the one side and the Islamists on the other. And because Indonesia was formed of diverse ethnic groups, religions, political backgrounds, and imaginations of a country imagination. So we need Pancasila to bridge those differences. And Pancasila has if I may claim, a kind of populist aspects in the fifth principle of social justice. It prioritizes the people above elite interests. In the theory of democracy, it is called popular sovereignty or popular accountability. It contradicts to the concept of liberal democracy, which protects individual rights, and the Pancasila give more attention to or protect more the people sovereignty. Is this okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a few more questions in the chat function, but before moving on to them, do you have any other questions? Anyone else?
Selçuk raised hand.
Okay, sorry?
Selçuk has raised.
Yeah, sorry, Selçuk, I didn't see. Yes, go on, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Yilmaz. Thank you very much for all speakers for your fascinating presentations. I want to ask Professor Rahman, comparing Indonesia with Turkey, Egypt, and India, what common features do you see in terms of the relationship between rising populism and religion? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Professor Yilmaz. May I answer directly?
Yes, please.
Okay, a common or underpinning feature is a cultural memory shared across sections of voters or citizens that feel that their conditions are marginalized by other social groups, other classes that benefit from either projects of economic growth, modernization, or nationalist development. And within this cultural memory and narrative, a grander narrative, such as the returning to the glorifying days of the Ottoman rule, or in Indonesia, it appears through grand narratives of either the Majapahit kingdom or Sriwijaya kingdom, or the or romanticizing the anti-imperialist struggles in which the intellectuals were unified with a common goal. And this cultural memory is monetized and commercialized through film, through soap operas, through social media posts, and small TikTok or YouTube videos, and tend to become more prominent, more intensive, closer to the elections, as political campaigners also instrumentalize these cultural memories to support or oppose politicians during their candidacy. So I hope that answers your question, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from, two questions actually from Kainat in the chat function. I'll read. Thank you to all the panelists for this insightful overview of various aspects of populism in Indonesia. My question is related to gender populism. Has gender conservatism been pushed in the mainstream by populist leaders, parties, or is it something that has always been a part of country's political at the fringes? Second question is about gender populism as well. Do you think gender populism is intersectional in Indonesia? For example, does it impact a woman from a non-Muslim background more compared to the Muslim counterpart? Professor Dewi is not here, but you may wish to answer. Maybe Dr. Inaya.
Thank you. From Professor Dewi Kurniawati's presentation, it aligns with some findings that I also gained through my fieldwork. There is a strong cohesiveness across women groups, especially homemakers, those whose main livelihood comes from mothering. And this doesn't mean that they're necessarily excluded from the labor market, because they also sell products online and through informal social networks. And in fact, these types of social demography that the Muslim mothers come from are actually the most resilient in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, when much of the labor force lost their employment due to social distancing measures implemented by the government. They are often misunderstood as being defenseless, passive, and apolitical, but in fact, in the gubernatorial elections in 2017 and the presidential elections in 2019, as Ibu Dewi presented, the power of a mama, or the power of mothers, were quite instrumental in spreading information in support of the presidential candidate that they're in for. And their spin-off in social media content shows some similarities with strong mothers and aunts in South Korea, meaning that they are central matriarchic figures in the family with an informal role that is broadly outside of the public and formal political space, but quite influential in the domestic sphere that could have effects in broader electoral dynamics. So to say that they are marginal or doubly marginalized, it really depends on the condition and the competition during a political moment. And they're often misunderstood by being portrayed as passive or outside of economic needs, requires economic empowerment, etc. But they are they're actually quite savvy, media savvy, in influencing political turnouts within their domestic and personal space. Returning the floor back to you, Professor Yilmaz.
Thank you, Dr. Inaya. Thank you very much. We have a question from Hassan Bakhtiar here. He actually asked two questions, but I didn't have a chance to ask the first one. Dr. Inaya answered it in the chat function. Thank you, Dr. Inaya, for that. So it was basically about the ideologies of political parties, and Dr. Inaya said that there are several research on this issue, and there is an almost consensus that the political parties do not have strong ideologies, and different classes in society, they don't have really strong religious, ideological convictions and or party loyalties. So they simply switch their parties just before the campaign. I hope I translated this properly. If I'm wrong, please, Dr. Inaya, you can correct me. The second question is for Professor Pradana Boy. My question seems that not so far from the topic that we have discussed. In the context of the promotion of Nikri Bersharia, do you think that it is part of instrumentalization of religion or religionization of politics, or both?
Thank you, Professor Yilmaz. So to Hasnan Bakhtiar's question about Indonesian-based Sharia-based Indonesia, which is promoted by newly Islamist group in Indonesia, I would say the first possibility would be greater rather than the second. It is an instrumentalization of religion for political ends. I believe so. Dr. Inaya has presented about how Muslim groups protest against Basuki Cahayapurnama, and also how Majelis Ulama Indonesia took a role in this massive protest. So in the first instance, in Italy, I believe this is about religion. This is about how Muslims defend their religion against, let's say, any blasphemy. But then, when the time passed, I changed my mind. I believe this is not about defending religion. This is about achieving political ends using religion as an instrument. So, why I said so? Because after the victory of Anies Baswedan in Jakarta gubernatorial election, then those actors said that let us extend Anies' victory to other provinces. So then this political, religion is instrumental. So if it is about religion purely, so there will be no such thing like let's extend the victory. And so another personal experience I had is my friend from very far from Jakarta came to Jakarta to join the Muslim to protest Basuki Cahayapurnama on what is believed as blasphemy to the Quran. And then he met many people on the train from many regions in Indonesia. And then he asked those people, who funded you coming to Jakarta to join the protest? And then they said, no, nobody funded us, but I sell everything I had. I sell everything I have. For example, I have goat, I have harvesting from banana, from many things. They just sell it. So the initial awareness is about defending religion. But the most interesting part from the story is that when they came to Jakarta and joined the protest in national monuments, then they see something weird, and then they say, no, I came with very sincere goal to defend my religion. But when I came to Jakarta, oh no, Jakarta people are playing with politics. So I believe this is mainly politics. Religion is only on the surface because we still have many me personally, I have many evidence to support my claim that this is not about to make politics more religious, but rather using religion to legitimize political ends. I think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pradana. Bülent, you have a question?
Yes, actually, my question is also will be directed to Professor Pradana. I wonder about the influence of foreign Islamist organizations and Islamist ideologies in Middle East on Indonesia, especially Indonesian youth. I mean, what is the role of Salafi movements and Wahhabi movements, and as an extension of these movements, what is the role of ISIL or Al Qaeda in the radicalization of Indonesian youth in recent decades? Could you make an assessment about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if we talk about radicalization or extremist thought in Indonesia, there is no single source. So we have diverse origin of radicalism. For example, we talk about Salafism. Many people not doubt, but they might be misunderstood about Salafi, as if Salafi is only one single group who adhere strictly to the Quran textually. But then our deep examination of this group say that actually Salafi is also a diverse group. The same also the case with Wahhabism. Wahhabism is also not one, but the problem with Indonesian extremism and radicalism among the youth is that, as I said before in my presentation, they they prefer to pick something instant, and everything related to, for example, the idea of tolerance, idea of accommodation, they directly said this is idea from the West. Once I addressed the group about tolerance and religious dialogue to young Muslim group, and then they said to me, they protested that you are promoting Western ideas, and I asked back to them, which ideas are Western, and the tolerance are Western. When they say that you are promoting Western ideas such as tolerance, then I also ask them, so it is, do you agree that Islam is not tolerant? No, Islam is tolerant. If you say Islam is tolerant, why you say that tolerant is ideas from Western? It is Western ideas. Then I said, tolerant is not Western, tolerant is Islamic, tolerant is something universal from human life. So very simple understanding that this idea is from the West, this idea for Islam, from Islam, and then they tend to contradict it without any further consideration of context. So yes, radicalization among the youth is very complicated situation, but one of the factors that I can nominate is the literacy, populism in religious literacy. That contribute very much for my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Our time is up, and yeah, Indonesia is a very important country, especially given the fact that the global geopolitics is moving towards Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific, with China's rise, with Quad and all other developments going on in the region. And Indonesia is also the largest Muslim democracy and a promising democracy as well. In the past, Turkey was a bright example of democracy in the Muslim world, but unfortunately it's gone. We lost Turkish democracy. It may come back, it may be revived, but we'll see. In the past, people were talking about revival of Islam. Now we need to speak about revival of democracy because of Islamist populist, unfortunately. So Indonesia is very important, and next year we have elections. There are a few candidates that our panelists mentioned briefly, and maybe we'll have another panel, I don't know, in future, looking at these different panelists and their approach to populism, international relations, and foreign policy from the Indonesian perspective. But thank you, everyone. This was a fascinating panel. There are many things that we could discuss, but we didn't have, unfortunately, more time. But hopefully, maybe we'll have another panel on this issue. Over to you, Chloe. Thank you.
Dear distinguished panelists, thank you very much for these very insightful presentations, and Professor Yilmaz for your great moderation. And attendees, you enriched the panel with your questions and remarks, so thank you very much. Please mark your calendars for the next session, which will take place on the 31st of August, where we will discuss different aspects of populism in India. Hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you.